This is going to be a super interesting session. I personally have been very excited for this session because I would love to know, more of the thought process behind, how our students are learning and, what is the science behind it all. So here today we have Anna Kay. She is from Quizlet. She is a learning scientist. I'm so excited to learn from you, Anna, and to see, what are we doing with Quizlet? Like, how is this really engaging our students mentally? What's the science behind it? So guys at home, remember this session is being recorded. All of the recordings are going to be available on the Quizlet YouTube channel once the conference is over. And also be sure to drop in any questions for Anna into the Q&A. And I'm excited to learn. Anna, thank you so much for being here. We are super excited to learn. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Rory. So it's great to be here today. Hello again to everyone I met last year, spoke at the Unconference, and it was great. And hello to all the new folks. So a little bit about me, for those I haven't met yet. My name is Anna Kazanzan, and I'm a learning and data scientist here. I've been at Quizlet for 2 years now. Immediately before that, I was wrapping up my PhD in cognitive neuroscience. So I was really studying how the brain forms memories that last. And while I was doing that, I was teaching a bunch of courses and really fell in love with teaching and wanted to come to Quizlet to actually bring a lot of the insights from the lab, from academia out into the world and to all of our students. And so I'm putting that background to good use. And with the session today, I'm going to share some of what I've learned about how to translate a lot of that learning science into practice and try to come up with some strategies together that we can use to help our students out in the coming years. So something that I've been really impressed by these past 2 years, looking at study data from students all over the globe, is how driven some of these students really are. They all have so much content to learn, and there is a subset of students that's really in control of their own learning process. They kind of establish really clear goals for themselves, and they form highly specific study routines, even just on Quizlet, right? One of many tools that that we use to learn. They form these really specific study routines that they apply time and time again. And to contrast a little bit, we've also seen the existence of these more last-minute learners. I'm sure you've all seen these in your classrooms as well. And they still have a ton of content that they need to learn for class. But instead of really being in control of their learning, they might be reacting a little bit more to other folks' standards, right? To the teacher's standards, to the standards of a textbook. And they end up really needing to get a lot done in a little bit of time in reaction to those standards. And so we see a huge part of our role being to decrease stress in those really key moments, those last study minutes, when you need to really focus in on what matters most and stay calm to get through it all. And so with those two kind of archetypes in mind, I did a little bit of digging recently into how Gen Z might like to learn. How can we understand how it maps on to these kind of two archetypes of learner, and whether we can help guide Gen Z to feel more in control and feel more driven whenever we catch on to these kind of last minute behaviors. So Gen Z refers to today's 11 to 27-year-olds. And they are really, they stand out as being true digital natives. They're really born into technology and are very comfortable using it. And they really value their individual expression. So these two facts have kind of led to them being summarized as a generation of self-learners who are very comfortable absorbing knowledge online, more so than previous generations. And there's a quote in a report by McKinsey that I found that I really loved as a kind of summary of all of this, that they view the self as a place to experiment, to test, and to change. And I'm going to talk for the next 45-ish minutes about how we see Quizlet fitting in as this kind of larger ecosystem of figuring out what kind of learner you are and testing new ideas and making changes that help you fall more under the camp of a driven student. And so in illustrating kind of the points that I want to share with you all. I'm going to be using some quotes that students and teachers have shared on their perspectives of the past year. The quotes are both from Quizlet surveys and from surveys that researchers at MIT and Harvard put out. So this one student perspective is, I've learned so much more about myself this past year. I'm way more resilient than I previously realized. So really highlighting this desire to learn about oneself. Okay, so what are the actual kind of components that are driving Gen Z and driving this desire to experiment and learn about yourself? One set of features that really stand out are the drive to be independent and really adaptable, being able to adjust to anything that comes your way on your own. And then another set of features are being really pragmatic, reasonable, and analytic about the choices that you make, which kind of result in this highly personal and evolving definition of what success is. So success kind of involves understanding yourself and expressing this individual truth. And it also involves kind of changing, adapting, and figuring out what works in the long run. Conveniently, career change is becoming more and more common. So being able to adapt to different careers and not just stick to a body of knowledge and skills that you learned during high school, middle school, college, but really learning how to learn and continue learning and adapting throughout your career is going to be even more important for this coming generation. So another student perspective on that note, I'm most proud of how mature, independent, and responsible I've become during this pandemic. So this really kind of independent, adaptable kind of way of seeing oneself is really appreciated by today's students. And so the researchers at MIT and Harvard put together a report of recommendations based on their learnings from student teacher perspectives on the past year. And one of the themes that stood out was wanting teachers and parents to help amplify student agency. Students often have greater motivation to study when they're actually in control of what they're studying, when they're studying, and how it is that they study. And so they suggest really leaning into students' growing sense of agency and finding ways to build on and amplify it going forward. Even when students are 100% back in the classroom, really still find ways to capture those aspects of providing space for learners to discover their own learning strategies and preferences and continue amplifying them. One of the themes that stood out in the surveys was offering catch-up days during the week. So like Wednesdays are catch-up days to study however it is you like and keep kind of on track throughout the school year by having a day where you're fully in control of how it is that you're learning, what it is that you're learning, and how you spread that learning throughout a day of the week. So talked quite a little bit at you to set things up. And now I want to get to a little bit of kind of active recall. So I pulled a question from a survey that was given to teachers in training about learning science principles and about whether kind of these future teachers understand them and whether they can apply them in their classrooms in the future. So one of the questions is true or false. Information that you want to remember is more likely to make it into your long-term memory. So I'm curious, what do you all think? True or false? Cool, seeing lots of both here. It's not an easy question. Not really, love it. Limbic system, bringing in the neuroscience. Cool. So the answer to this question was false, based on the way they set it up, and only 18% of future teachers answered it correctly. I think it's false if you're assuming that nothing else is going on except for a student just wanting really hard to remember. So if you want really hard to remember something, but you don't do anything, you don't follow that up with using better learning strategies, studying more, making connections to other things that you care about, that you're interested in, then you're not going to be more likely to get it into long-term memory. And the kind of point boils down to, like, intent is not enough. Just wanting to remember something and hoping and wishing that you'll remember it isn't going to be good enough. And the thing that sets driven students apart from other kind of archetypes of students is that they end up finding learning strategies that work. So they can say, I want to remember this. I love this class. I might build a career out of this topic. And so I'm going to use a different strategy in order to actually remember this material and hold on to it forever. Cool. And so on that note, students this year actually found themselves learning a lot more about learning strategies that worked for them through, again, this kind of space to try things out. So the student found themselves utilizing online resources for studying, self-assessing, and studying overall. In previous years, I would spend hours flipping through pages. I'm absorbing information at a much faster rate now. So I'm curious, what are strategies that you try to help your students out with, or how do you help unlock kind of students' own learning about how to be a strategic learner in your classroom? I'd love to see some ideas in the chat. There's no right answers. You don't have to say Quizlet. Looking for any and all ideas. Cool. Emphasizing time to try to reduce cramming, reading over what the teacher is going to be teaching. There's so many, it's hard to keep up. Chunking information, making it manageable, great visuals, critical thinking, lots of concrete ideas for tools to use, providing choice, different games to keep people motivated, distributing learning over time. Excellent. Okay, thank you so much. All right, and so of course I'm going to pitch a little bit of what I think about how Quizlet can help. I like to think of Quizlet as a sandbox. There's so many different study tools on Quizlet, and they're all really flexible. Every student can kind of find something different from all the different study modes we offer. And within each of those, there's so many different configurations. You can really set up learning to function any way that you prefer, that you find is working for you. And so students end up experimenting with different ways to learn the exact same material in all of these different modes of studying. And through a report by Project Tomorrow, it's found that pandemic self-learning promoted student ownership of the learning process through technology. So through the technology that was still available wherever you are. So I think that's a reason we saw so many different kind of expressions of learning strategies on our site this past year as well. Okay, so with that set up and how Quizlet might be able to help as sort of sandbox for self-learners to discover what it is that works for them or that they find preferable, I'm going to go through 3 kind of concrete things that you can do together with your students to help them tap into that. So we're going to go over self-testing for success and the power of practice tests. If you've read up on learning science or gone to any talks before, self-testing is a hot topic. So we'll touch on some aspects that might be new to you. Then we're going to go over logging learning strategies. So how we actually turn these learning strategies into something concrete that we can think about and experiment with and observe over time. And then finally, a favorite topic, managing time and how to really be self-sufficient in setting your own goals and actually meeting them. Okay, so that's a lot. Let's get started. All right, first up, self-testing for success. So mentioned, this is a very large topic in learning science because it's really, really robust. This is like one of the biggest findings, and we build this into our product pretty much in every way possible. So there are both direct and indirect benefits of self-testing, testing yourself, whether it's with flashcards or practice quizzes or asking yourself questions and answering them. Many ways to do it, but just this general practice of pulling information out from your memory, self-testing, is really beneficial. And so it can improve learning directly by literally strengthening the memories that you're retrieving from your mind. That's what we call the direct benefit of self-testing. And that's what we call the testing effect, or you may have heard of retrieval practice, doing retrieval in your practice in your classroom, asking your students questions from previous units to keep them kind of practicing that remembering sort of action. But interestingly, in surveys, only 18% of students say that this direct benefit is the main reason that they self-test. Most students recognize instead the indirect benefit of self-testing. So they're still self-testing, but they're just not doing it for that reason. Self-testing improves learning indirectly by helping students monitor their learning progress over time. And then if something's not working, change course. So they might, instead of taking practice tests just to strengthen memories, they might be taking practice tests to check in on or monitor how well it is that they're learning, so that they can then improve their learning performance by doing something differently. If they're not learning as fast as they thought they might focus in on some area of their learning or try a different strategy. So what about practice tests on Quizlet? Most study tools, as I previously mentioned, most study tools on Quizlet confer the direct benefits of testing. Most are some kind of example of self-testing or retrieval practice in, with different flavors, maybe like more of a game or more like looks like a standard practice test. But test mode is the kind of mode that has that more traditional practice test like feel to it. And it really supports this indirect benefit of monitoring your learning progress over time. And test mode provides practice tests with lots of different types of questions. They can just be these written kind of free response answers like the ones you see here. They're multiple choice, true or false, matching questions. And when we look at the data of the students who choose to take these practice tests with test mode on Quizlet, most of them are actually kind of studying a little bit, checking in on their progress, figuring out what gaps they have, and then continuing studying. So they're likely going in and filling in those gaps, maybe trying a different way to study, but changing something and continuing to study. And that's 70% of the users we're looking at. 70% of the practice test takers would continue studying after taking these practice tests. There's even a smaller group that just use Quizlet for practice tests. So some people who've really recognized that indirect benefit of really monitoring how they're doing and continuing to take tests over and over again. Cool. So why don't students always do this? Why don't they always self-test? One reason is it can be pretty hard. It's a lot harder to test yourself and remember information that you might not have learned that well yet than it is to just reread your notes or the textbook. But when it's made a little bit easier, students find it a lot more likable, a lot more desirable. So something that we're experimenting with on Quizlet is to provide hints for students. There are actually laboratory studies that show that when hints are available, students are much more likely to choose to test themselves than to just restudy, reread the same material over and over and feel like they're forming memories without actually forming them. So it's just an example of how we're using hints. When people are learning vocabulary, we might provide a hint of how that vocabulary is used in a sentence to get them to kind of remember the actual term that a definition corresponds to, instead of just trying and failing to remember. Another way to help out is to keep people motivated. Maybe self-testing, it's hard. Maybe it gets a little bit boring to test yourself. You're not getting that much like rich input. You're not watching videos that are really entertaining. You're just trying to pull information from mind. So one of the ways that folks use Quizlet to self-test more frequently is to use learning games to stay motivated. So we have games like Match and Gravity that really keep learners engaged with time pressure and leaderboards, make it feel a little bit more exciting. And so 80% of learners who are using games are combining them with other ways to study. They're not just playing games, they're actually kind of self-regulating their motivation, making sure that they stay engaged while they're using our other more kind of traditional study modes. So some are warming up with games, some use them to wrap up, and some of them kind of sprinkle these study games throughout their learning. Cool. How else can we help students really make sure that they're testing for that progress, that monitoring? Teachers can encourage testing for learning in the class or at home. So you can play a game called Quizlet live with your class, and you can play it well before test day so that students actually have the opportunity to change their strategies and try something new if they find like, hey, I really didn't understand what we learned in class today as well as I thought I did. I'm going to try studying the material with a totally different approach. And I want to make sure I have time to do that before I'm actually tested on it. And you can also assign test mode at home. You don't have to, care about how well students are doing at those tests, but really just build that habit to test themselves and to think through how they're going to use test results, right? Put the power of monitoring their learning, seeing how well their learning is progressing in the student's hands. So to do that, you could have students kind of decide what strategies they're going to use after they take a practice test at home or after they play a game of Quizlet live, and decide, if I feel like I got, 80% right, then I'm going to do this lighter review this way. If I don't do as well as that, even though I think I will, then I'm really gonna, try a different approach, like adding 30 minutes a day of active study strategies to my routine. All right, so we focused in on kind of one concrete strategy, learning strategy that we can help our students with. And now I want to expand out. So there are lots of other strategies aside from practice testing that can help out with learning. And a big question I had is, A, how do I learn about what those strategies are? B, how do I better think about which strategies I'm adopting? It can feel really intangible. Like most students will say, I don't know, I just tried studying a particular way and I never really looked back. I just stuck with it my entire educational career. And so students end up studying in very different ways without really realizing that they're doing something totally different from what their classmates might be doing. And that maybe they're putting in all the hard work, but if they put it in slightly differently, it might be a lot more effective. So I'm going to talk about logging learning strategies as a strategy to unlock what strategy students are using. So I want to start out with a question. Have you ever been surprised by any of the learning strategies that your students have used? Have you ever kind of discovered that they're studying in a way that you'd never heard of or you would never suggested in class? Yeah, what were those strategies, if you remember, and how did you find out about them? I'm loving all the yeses. Concept mapping, love it. And then you implemented it for the whole class. Setting up their own teams. They try test first and stay away from learn. Symbols, think aloud. We're going to talk about think aloud in a slide or two. Playing gravity on their own. Gaming with people from English-speaking countries to learn English. That's so smart. Songs, beats, these kind of mnemonics, teaching someone else. Okay, so many great strategies you've discovered. Excellent. Okay, so I'm going to go through some examples of strategies. And someone just mentioned think aloud, which is so funny. These strategies were used in a laboratory study where they used the think aloud procedure while students were studying. And so what that meant is they were learning some content. I think this is neuroscience. Everything comes back to neuroscience. And they had to just narrate their kind of thought process as they were learning these neuroscience modules in the lab. And if they stopped narrating for 5 seconds, the experimenter would be like, hey, keep talking, keep thinking out loud. And so they use this procedure for the entire duration of this online course. And while students were thinking out loud, the experimenters could then jot down which strategies people are using and how often they're using them. And so they discovered that there were some very efficient strategies that students were using and describing in their think aloud. Yes, I will definitely share it. Sorry, I'm not answering all the questions right now, but I definitely will in the Q&A, and I'll share my slides for sure. So some of the really efficient strategies were summarization, which is just summarizing exactly what had just been read. So if they were reading about Alzheimer's and the amyloid protein, they might say, describe 2 enzymes, the first one beta secretase, cuts the APP outside the membrane, or elaboration, really integrating what you just learned in the course with prior knowledge. So the example here was linking up ventricles in the brain to cavities in the heart and connecting that they're both fluid filled. So summarization, elaboration were really effective. And then there were also not concrete strategies, but monitoring behaviors that were really, really useful in this study as well. So these were judgment of learning, which is making a statement about what a student understands while they're learning. For example, saying, I really don't get what an enzyme is as you're reading a passage, and really acknowledging, like, you know, I read this, it probably makes sense, but not to me yet. I need to do something else. And then probably my favorite, based on the context of this talk, there's a learning strategy called monitoring use of strategy, which is commenting on how useful or successful a strategy you tried actually was. So one student said, I should probably stop making notes. It's taking too much of my time. Really insightful and effective, because this actually was found to affect how well they did on the test later on. And then there were a slew of kind of less efficient behaviors. I don't want to spend too much time on them, but to give you an example, making a comment about how difficult a task is, like saying, wow, this was so easy to learn. Doing that didn't really seem to relate to how well students actually learned. Taking notes, as you may have guessed from the previous slide, was not that effective, just copying over text from the websites. And direct rehearsal. So trying to directly memorize and just state a keyword over and over and over, tau protein, tau protein, tau protein. That was not really effective. I can go on about why I think that probably wasn't very effective, but just so you know. All right, so what were the benefits of those efficient learning strategies of making judgments of learning, of elaborating, of summarizing what you're learning? So number one, it improves learning above and beyond the direct benefits of testing by 40%. So in this study, they actually set it up so that one group was taking practice tests as they were learning, so they could get that indirect, so many great comments in the chat. Oh, okay, I need to close it, I'm getting distracted. So they, basically the two groups both got direct benefits of testing. They both took practice tests, but what was different was when they took the practice test. So group one took them throughout learning, so they could actually change their strategies, right? They were actually monitoring how well they were doing and adjusting. But group two just got their practice tests all at the end. So they couldn't change how they were studying at all. And there's a huge difference in how well the group that had those interspersed practice tests did, because they could change what strategies they were using. They also did some kind of judgment of learning measures to see whether, like, not just how well students did on the test, but whether they knew they were going to do well. Did they actually accurately monitor their learning? And the answer was yes, when they were taking practice tests throughout. And so the real huge takeaway was, when practice tests are followed by shifts in strategy, that's when students learn new material most effectively. Cool. So some new features in Quizlet that relate are these callouts for strategic learning. we're currently working on kind of celebrating strategy wins on Quizlet. And we are presenting unique badges that are going to really reinforce these good habits. For example, when students go into test mode and take a practice test, we'll celebrate that. When they learn with others by joining a class, that'll be another moment for celebration. Studying consistently, chipping away at your goals day by day, and setting goals, right? Actually, now within Learn Mode, we allow you to set your learning goal, helps us help you study more effectively, and helps you stay motivated to meet your learning goals. So we celebrate all of these now. Ooh, thanks. That's a little bit about student strategies. I'm also curious about what strategies you've been using to learn throughout the Unconference. Are there any favorites that you found in your own professional development or learning about anything related to hobbies that you love? Note taking, staying engaged, jotting things down. Reteaching to your colleagues, love to see it. Mind mapping, reviewing those notes. Yeah, and I'll say, even though note taking by itself wasn't the most efficient strategy in that one study, it's very useful. Like, if you don't have access to what you just learned, how are you going to do any sort of useful studying with it later on? So it's all about how you use those notes later on. I'm not trying to say stop taking notes at all with this talk. Great. All right, so how do you take all these great learning strategies and figure out what you're doing and what you could be doing differently? So I want to talk a little bit about learning logs to make this, intangible learning strategy stuff a little bit more tangible. You might all be familiar with these kind of basic learning logs that are really focused on content. You might have students take this type of log where they write down key concepts, maybe on the left side, and then they get metacognitive. They start thinking about what it is that they're learning, thinking about their own thinking by noting their reactions on the right side of the page. And you can introduce these in class, in the last few minutes of each class or on Fridays, so people can reflect on the week. And this is great. You can even use it for more advanced materials. I use them when I was reading academic articles in grad school. This is a great, very specific learning log structured for research papers. And it's really useful for self-directed studying, particularly when there are really great guiding questions provided. And so teachers will generally provide prompts or guiding questions and let students choose some or all of these to kind of answer in the log. Some of them are just straightforward descriptions. I've been learning about blah. I'm paying attention. I know what I just learned about. Some of them are bigger picture, like being able to say why this topic was useful. Helping students out with strategy logs. These are focused a little bit on process of learning as opposed to the direct content. Instead of imposing strategies through guiding questions, you let students select their own strategies and guide them in evaluating their own strategies. And here, the guiding questions or the prompts that you provide are even more helpful. So some examples of what you might want to prompt students with in a strategy log. Before studying, you might have them think about, what steps are you planning on taking when studying? Are you planning on rereading, taking notes while you read, summarizing, using flashcards, using learn mode or test mode, playing a game of match with this material? And then during studying, you can actually have them jot down, say every 10 minutes, not too frequently, so it's not overwhelming, what step they spent the most time on, which strategy they actually end up using. And then after studying, you can have them think about how long they actually spent on each strategy and whether that aligned with their expectations. Are they realizing that they are spending this much time on each of these steps? And then when they're wrapped up after studying, they can have some reflective questions around, if you had to skip one strategy, what would it be and why? If you had to add one more step, what would it be and why? To get them really thinking about the fact that they have control over how they're using their study time and thinking about how each step they're taking really benefits their ultimate learning. Okay, so what are some other tips for enabling this type of strategy logging? This is probably one of my favorites, making tracking strategies a habit. So assigning logging daily for maybe a brief period of time, again, so it's not overwhelming, taking up a bunch of classroom time. And so I think like making this very manageable and making this a kind of brief period of reflection time in the school year as opposed to a daily habit is probably going to work out more effectively. But it should be long enough that learners can actually explore changes over time. They can actually see what's working for them and what isn't. And I think it's really important to also kind of customize this to your own classroom and think about your own classroom challenges. So the challenges aren't always going to be, you know, students really struggle with this section of the material. I want to see how I can get test grades up. They might be like, my classroom really struggles to re-engage after a long holiday break, or really struggles to get focused at the start of a new school year because the way that we learn in my classroom is so new. And so you might just shine a spotlight on learning during a particular period of the school year to really engage in that reflection with your students. And then of course, you really want to customize to your specific group of students and have them share. I think a lot of this might be personal, and a lot of students might feel less than comfortable sharing all of this material with everyone else. But I think selectively sharing and learning from each other's strategies is really powerful. All right, and so back to a teacher perspective on the past year. They were reflecting on what students were proud of, and all students found that they were proud of something. And teachers kind of came away with the notion that they need to make more space for students to share what it is that they're proud of. And this is one way that they can channel that. They can channel how it is that they're proud of, what they're learning about their learning, and helping each other grow as a group. Okay, so I just described a strategy to get students to think about how it is that they're strategically learning. And I'm just going to give you one example of how you can then take that information and help them take action. This is going to be really dependent on what it is that you want them to reflect on and what challenges you have in your classroom. This is just one concrete kind of exercise. So I think a lot of students tend to take more time taking notes or rereading than actually studying those notes and studying what it is that they just reread. So one concrete action is to guide students to share materials or reuse them, maybe even construct notes together so they can really focus their study time on active study, on doing that recall practice or elaboration, making those mind maps. And in fact, most learners on Quizlet, 75 to 80%, are jumping right into studying with others' materials. Students in higher ed are creating 2 times more content than those in high school, probably because there's less material already out there. But particularly if you have middle school, high school students, they can oftentimes find resources that they can then use to actively study more quickly. So one concrete step. Great. Okay, so we got through 2 sections. Last one, ironically, is on managing time. I should have known saving this for the end means I'm going to have less time for the managing time section, which is hilarious. So we're going to talk about self-sufficient goal setting. So research has shown that students do better in school when they feel like they're in control, and that setting goals in and of itself can make a huge impact on learning gains. It can increase the amount learned by anywhere from 18 to 41% of the total material. And why is that? Some of the kind of hypotheses are that setting goals helps students focus on really specific outcomes. It encourages them to seek challenges to help them get to those outcomes. And it clearly connects immediate tasks with future accomplishments. So if those future accomplishments are specific, then you can make immediate tasks that you know will impact those specific things much more desirable to do right away. So how can we guide student goal setting? Well, the Northwest, the NWAEA had teachers at Walnut Hills share takeaways for helping students go from mandate to ownership with their goals. So rather than mandating goals upon students, helping them own those goals. And they ended up having conversations with students about their goals, having really simple, targeted, and kind of short-term focuses in these conversations. So helping students set goals that are no more than 4 to 6 weeks out. And this was kind of the best practice they arrived at. They really found that for enabling goal setting, building a relationship with their students was key, and providing examples of goal setting in their own lives. It doesn't have to be academic or learning related goal setting. Any sort of goal setting in your own life was helpful for them. And it really helped students recognize that they have some control over their grade. The grade isn't just a reflection of their innate ability, it's a reflection of their effort and of the strategies that they put in to learn material. So if you want to make that concrete again and make worksheets to help students out with goal setting, some hot tips. You want to guide students toward a clear goal and a really firm due date. And this is an opportunity to really center student choice. You want to provide a set of possible goals that they can choose from. You want to work together to describe actionable steps to get to it. It's not enough oftentimes to set that goal. You need to actually create a roadmap to get to that goal. And I love this part. You have students describe evidence that they've reached their goal. Rather than telling them what evidence you expect, you allow them multiple avenues for students to demonstrate their improvement. And relatedly, you also then don't factor goal success into student grades. It's kind of a separate dimension, right? Like you're becoming this empowered owner of your own learning, and you're practicing setting goals and reaching them, really focusing on that learning process. And that should be kind of distinct from achieving a particular grade on a particular test. Okay, and timing is a really important part of meeting goals. What do I mean by timing or time management? I mean making decisions around time, decisions to structure it, to then protect it, and adapt it whenever conditions change. So these three components of time management, I think we talk about structure a lot when we think about time management. So structuring your time is mapping activities to time, using something like a schedule, a planner, something systematic. Protecting time, on the other hand, means really setting boundaries around time and making sure that you eliminate intrusions, that you stay focused, you don't multitask. And then adapting to time is being responsive and flexible. This one I love seeing examples of in Quizlet users. So taking advantage of waiting time. If you can get through some of your studying while you're waiting for the bus, I spent so much time on buses growing up. If you can get through that time and chip away at studying and actually use your time to rest when you get home, that's an excellent example of time management. Another good example is anticipating delays. When you're doing planning, structuring your time in a planner, actually put in the time that you think might end up delaying you. So that one's also really helpful. And so students this past year were saying how great they feel feeling in control of their own schedule, and noting how their study habits have changed in this time management sort of dimension. So doing all their work in the morning, trying not to study later on in the day, having this clear distinction of work and playtime. And so these are some great kind of principles to follow with time management, but there's actually a lot of research to back up the fact that time management also works. It actually has the benefits that we hope it does. It's not just a way to productively procrastinate. In a huge meta-analysis with over 50,000 individuals, time management consistently had a positive impact across a lot of different dimensions. I'll go over briefly. On the job, there are positive impacts, and they've increased over the years. So Gen Z is going to benefit more and more from building up that time management skill. And even greater benefits are seen in academic settings. The impacts are on both like behavior, like how involved you are at school, at work, how much you procrastinate, but also impact your supervisor's ratings or your GPA, your exam scores. And probably the most important thing, maybe if there's like one takeaway that I want to make sure to include, it's the effect on well-being, mental well-being and life satisfaction is even higher. So building these solid time management skills in your students will not just, help them do better on standardized tests. It'll really help with life satisfaction and there's stress levels in the day-to-day. Yeah. Cool. So I have some tips. I'll share these slides. I'll have some tips on how to actually help make time management work, how to make it into a habit, a game, and really a positive experience. And I really love seeing the quotes from students saying how much having that good attitude with school and managing their time well really affected their well-being and was something like a source of pride for them, not their grades, but how in control they felt over their time. So with that, and only slightly over time, I just want to wrap up on this like overarching point that sometimes not being there to hold students' hands can give them the space that they need to learn and to work through challenges on their own to build all of these skills. We can create the perfect curriculum for students with the perfect content, and that will be a wonderful experience for that school year, that semester. But it won't leave them with that lasting ability to continue to learn on their own throughout their lives. And so that's something that you can actively think about and think about how to help students kind of thrive in these less controlled spaces moving forward beyond your classroom. Cool. I am happy to pause for questions now. Or hear about which of today's strategies you're excited to try out with your students. Yes, I will absolutely share this PowerPoint. Rory, I don't know, or Jose, I don't know if the best way is to just share the link here or if you have been sending things out afterwards.
That is totally the top question of your session is getting a copy of your slides. So if you just want to do a share link right now and drop it into the chat, or Jose, if you want to do that right now. But you, Anna, have shared just an incredible amount of information. I was kind of scrolling through the Q&A tab. I think a lot of the things in there you basically touched upon at some point in, but I think you may do a better job than me looking at that Q&A tab, if you don't mind, just to see if
Let me take a look.
That you think that you can answer. A lot of it does relate to the slide, so I think a lot of people will get their answer from that.
Great. Oh my gosh, that was a lot of content. Thank you all for sticking with me. For some reason, the Q&A, oh, here it is. Different page. I need data on what percentage of Gen Z are true self-learners. Oh gosh, I think that'd be a hard one to operationalize. I don't have the data, maybe over time. Does Quizlet have a specific video that we can share with the students at the beginning of the year to explain how it works and the different tools? I'm sure YouTube has plenty, but which one is best and most up to date? So we have tons of resources on how to use our tools in our help section. that will have really detailed, step-by-step guides on how to use the different study modes. We also have a page as of last year called How Quizlet Works that explains a little bit of the learning science behind how everything on Quizlet works and how to get the most out of it. So that's also something you can share with your students. That's very high level. We can drop that in the chat too. Would the hints come up all the time or only when needed is a great question and something that our product team thinks about a lot. We're just doing some initial investigation into how we might be using hints. So right now, there's a button that students would have to click on when they want a hint. So it is kind of when needed. They're not just going to show up if they don't want the hint. They'd have to ask for the hint. But we've also talked about, do we only want to provide that button to get a hint earlier on in studying and then eventually remove it so that students really have to test themselves fully without the additional hint? So it's a really great question. Could you please talk about why rehearsal was found to be less effective? So I don't think that they dug into that question in that study, but my take is that form of rehearsal where you just read a term and then you practice repeating it to yourself immediately means you're not giving yourself enough time to kind of flush out the contents of your mind and have to try to remember it all over again. That sort of process is what's actually really valuable for learning, is giving yourself enough time that word tau protein is no longer in what's called your working memory, and you have to rely on it being in your long-term memory to really pull it back out. And so if you're just kind of practicing on loop, that might not be helpful enough to then later on test day remember from long-term memory, from your kind of stored memory, what that term was and what it meant. Hopefully that helps. And okay, some of these might be specific to certain slides, so I don't know if I can piece it together. What were the subject areas used? Some of the studies that I was looking at, they were specifically like neuroscience content. The meta-analysis was, based on any sort of content, including like workplace skills. So there was no specific subject area, but maybe reach out to me later and tell me what slide you were talking about, and I can get back to you about it.
I think we have time for maybe one more question.
Great. I think we've there. Okay, let me skim the questions really quickly. Slides, link. Okay, so there's one more question. Okay, there's a question about badging and whether you can accumulate points and how to support really competitive students. I think that's also something that the team that built the badges is exploring. We definitely have something like points with what are called study streaks. So you sort of accumulate points by studying week by week and keeping that streak going. So that's probably the closest thing that's definitely going to be a part of Quizlet soon. But there might be other point-like mechanisms in the future. Cool.
Awesome. Well, Anna, I think that's all the time that we have for this session. Thank you so much. The response in the chat has just been incredible. Everyone has been really excited about all the information that you presented. Tons of thank yous in the chat. So thank you so much, Anna. Again, guys, this has been recorded, so it's going to be on the YouTube, the Quizlet YouTube channel, probably by tomorrow, I would imagine. So you can rewatch and get all of that information there for sure. Thank you, everyone. And join us for our last session about Quizlet Teacher Account, everyone. That is our last session. And then we're going to be wrapping things up. And the Quizlet Unconference is going to come to a close so soon. But thank you, everyone. See you in the next session.
Thanks, everyone.